There is a town under these pines, and almost nothing of it is left. A century and a half ago the ground I am walking on held hotels, stores, warehouses, and churches, and it was one of the most populous towns in all of Minnesota. Then a railroad company drew a line on a map 10 miles north of here, and within a decade nearly everyone was gone. Today it is Crow Wing State Park, a quiet stretch of forest where two great rivers meet. This is the story of a frontier boomtown that vanished, and of the screeching wooden carts that once made it rich. We are in central Minnesota, about 9 miles south of the city of Brainerd, in the heart of the state's lake country. Crow Wing State Park covers more than 3,100 acres along the east bank of the Mississippi River in Crow Wing County. The park sits at a spot geography made important, the place where the Crow Wing River flows into the Mississippi. For thousands of years of travel by water and by trail, whoever held this confluence held the crossroads of the region. That is exactly why a town grew here, and why we are here today. The hike itself is an easy and beautiful one, a little over 2 miles of river bluff and shaded forest on a warm July afternoon. The trails here are wide and soft underfoot, winding through stands of red pine and oak with the river never far away. It is hard to imagine this as a busy main street, which it once was. The forest has been patient, and it has taken almost everything back. But keep your eyes on the ground and the clearings, because the clues are still here. The Crow Wing River rises far to the west and runs about 100 miles before it reaches this spot and empties into the Mississippi. At the confluence, the Mississippi is still a young river, only a couple hundred miles from its source at Lake Itasca, narrow and quick between wooded banks. Confluences like this one were the interstate exchanges of the canoe age, places where travelers rested, traded, and watched who was coming and going. The water road west up the Crow Wing led toward the prairie and the buffalo country. The water road north and south was the Mississippi itself, the spine of the continent. The name comes from an island at the mouth of the Crow Wing River whose shape suggested the outstretched wing of a bird, and the Ojibwe name for the place carried that same image. This ground also saw conflict long before any town stood here. In 1768, a 2-day battle was fought at this confluence between Ojibwe and Dakota warriors, and shallow depressions near the river, remembered as rifle pits, are thought to trace back to that fight. The battle helped secure Ojibwe control of this part of the upper Mississippi country. It is a brief, sobering layer of a very long human story here, and worth a quiet moment on the bluff. The trail climbs gently along the bluff line now, and through the trees you get long views of the Mississippi sliding past. In July the banks are heavy and green, and the river is low and glassy, braiding around sandbars. This stretch of shoreline looks much as it did when the first traders paddled through. Every historic account of this place begins with someone arriving by water. So as you walk, keep the river on your shoulder, because for 2 centuries it was the main road. The first permanent business here was fur. A trading post opened at Crow Wing in 1823, dealing in beaver, muskrat, and other pelts brought in by Ojibwe hunters and carried out by canoe. The American Fur Company ran a post here, and the confluence became a reliable stop on the water routes of the North Country. Furs moved south and east toward markets, and trade goods, cloth, kettles, and tools moved north and west in return. For a generation, that exchange was the entire economy of this riverbank. Along this part of the walk, the forest keeps opening into grassy clearings, and these openings are not accidents. This is the Old Townsite, and the clearings mark where buildings and yards and garden plots once stood. Interpretive markers in the park point out where the main street ran and where individual houses and shops sat. Walking it now, in the quiet with grasshoppers rising ahead of your boots, is a strange feeling. It is a main street with no town on it. In the 1840s, this quiet riverbank suddenly found itself on a highway. Around 1844, a new overland route called the Woods Trail was blazed between the Red River settlements near present-day Winnipeg and the market at St. Paul. Unlike the older prairie routes to the west, this trail swung inland through the forest country, and it crossed the Mississippi River right here at Crow Wing. That crossing made this town a required stop on one of the great trade routes of North America. The traffic that came down that trail is one of the strangest and loudest stories of the American frontier. The vehicle of that trade was the Red River Oxcart, and there was nothing else quite like it. It was built entirely of wood and animal hide, with no iron in it at all, so it could be repaired anywhere with an axe and a knife. The axles were lashed on with strips of wet bison hide, and they were never greased, because dust would grind a greased axle to pieces. An ungreased wooden axle under a heavy load screams, and travelers wrote that a cart train could be heard for miles before it was seen. Some called the sound the Northwest Fiddle, which is a generous name for it. Parts of the trail system in this park follow the actual route the carts used, and you can still read the old road in the land. The corridor is broad and worn, pressed into the soil by decades of hooves and wheels. Imagine standing here in the 1850s as a brigade came through, the screech arriving long before the oxen did. Dust, noise, drivers shouting in French and Ojibwe and English. Then a slow parade of carts rolling down to the river, right where we are headed now. The carts traveled in organized brigades, typically 10 carts with 3 drivers and an overseer, and the big seasonal caravans could stretch up to 2 miles long. Each cart carried 800 to 1,000 pounds, and an ox walked it about 20 miles in a day. Southbound, they hauled furs packed in 90-pound bundles, along with pemmican and buffalo tongue from the plains. Northbound, they carried seed, tools, stoves, liquor, champagne, and on at least one recorded trip, a piano. The full journey between the Red River settlements and St. Paul took around 6 weeks, and Crow Wing sat near the middle of it. The whole reason the town existed was the crossing. Here the caravans had to get themselves, their oxen, and their half-ton loads over the Mississippi River. At low water, the fords near the confluence could be waded, and when the water ran too deep, cart boxes were wrapped in hide and floated across like boats. A crossing meant delay, and delay meant customers. Every cart that paused here needed food, repairs, trade, and rest. And a town of hotels, stores, and saloons grew up on the bank to sell all of it. The trail drops down off the bluff now toward the water, roughly the same descent the cart drivers made. Down here you can stand at the edge of the Mississippi and look across to the far bank, and it is not far at all. It is strange how small the great river is this far north. That modest width is what made the crossing possible, and the crossing is what made the town. Geography wrote the whole story before anyone laid a foundation. By the 1850s and 60s, Crow Wing was a genuine frontier capital, counted among the most populous towns in Minnesota. It had hotels, general stores, warehouses, saloons, and in time 3 churches, serving a mixed community of Ojibwe, Metis, French Canadian, and Yankee residents. Traders, missionaries, lumbermen, and government agents all did business on its main street. The town even produced a notable writer, William Whipple Warren, a Metis historian who set down the early history of the Ojibwe people in English. For a moment, this riverbank was one of the most important places in the state. The grandest surviving trace of that era is the house of Clement Beaulieu, a Metis fur trader who ran the American Fur Company post here and became one of the leading men of the town. His home was built in the Greek Revival style, a white frame statement of confidence on the edge of the wilderness. When the town died, the house survived, and it was later moved away, used as a farmhouse, and nearly forgotten. In 1988, it was brought back and returned to its original location in the park. Today it stands restored on the Old Townsite, the one building that still holds the town's place in line. The walking route threads right through the heart of the Old Town Platte, past the Beaulieu House site and the marked locations of its vanished neighbors. Signs along the way name the businesses that stood in each clearing. It is the rare hike where the interpretive markers are more haunting than the scenery. Each one is a little tombstone for a building, and the pines just carry on growing through all of it. Faith traveled the cart trails too, and Crow Wing in its prime supported 3 churches. The Catholic mission here was established by Father Francis Xavier Piers, a Slovenian priest whose name is still on the map of this region, and Episcopal missionaries worked here as well. A small memorial chapel now stands near the old mission ground, built later on privately held land to honor that history. Nearby, a historic cemetery keeps the names of the townspeople. It is a brief stop, but it is the most human corner of the park. This stretch of trail runs long and quiet under tall pines, and it is a good place to let the story settle. 50 minutes of walking covers what was once a full day of frontier commotion. The town survived on motion, on carts and canoes and cash-changing hands. Standing here now, the silence is the whole point. Everything you cannot hear is the history. The end came fast, and it came on rails. Through the late 1860s, railroads pushed across Minnesota, and steam trains could move in hours what a cart brigade moved in weeks. The Northern Pacific Railway needed a place to cross the Mississippi, and Crow Wing fully expected to be chosen. Instead, in 1871, the railroad crossed the river about 10 miles upstream at a raw new townsite called Brainerd. The Oxcart highway was suddenly obsolete, and so was the town that lived on it. The decline had already begun before the tracks were laid. In 1868, the Ojibwe community at Crow Wing, a large share of the town's population and trade, was resettled to the White Earth Reservation to the northwest. Then the railroad pulled the region's business to Brainerd, and merchants literally followed it, some moving their buildings north. By 1880, most of Crow Wing's residents had moved on, and the townsite began its long fade into meadow and woods. A place that had taken 50 years to build emptied out in about 10. Walking the empty plat today, you can trace the main street as a mowed path through the grass. This is as close as Minnesota comes to a true ghost town, though the ghosts here left almost nothing standing. No storefront shells, no leaning barns, just lilacs gone wild, cellar depressions, and the river beyond. In its own way, that makes it more powerful. The land simply closed over the town like water. The forest around us has its own boom and bust story. In the late 1800s, Minnesota's white pine country was cut hard, and rivers like the Crow Wing and the upper Mississippi became highways for a different cargo, log drives floating downstream to the sawmills. The great pines that had shaded the cart trail went down the river as timber. What we walk through today is largely second growth, forest that returned after the axes moved on. This ground has been a trade route, a town, and a timber lot, and it has outlived all three. Give the North Woods a century of peace, and this is what it does. Red pine and white pine have risen again over the Old Townsite, mixed with oak, aspen, and birch, and the understory has knit itself back together. The park's forest today is healthy enough that it is easy to mistake it for wilderness that was never touched. It was touched by everything: fur trade, town building, logging, fire. The recovery is the quietest achievement in the whole story. The trail comes back to the water on a lovely riverside stretch, including a boardwalk section that carries you right along the edge of the Mississippi. This is the best walking in the park, flat and easy with the river gliding by an arm's length away. Herons work the shallows, and canoes drift past the same banks the fur canoes used. On a summer afternoon, it is pure peace. It is worth remembering that this exact shoreline was once the busiest place for 100 miles. The Mississippi here is an adolescent river, hundreds of miles and many locks away from the mile-wide giant it becomes in the south. Up here it is clear, quick, and intimate, a river you can read from bank to bank. The park protects a long run of this shoreline, including more than 3 miles of river frontage added when the park expanded by 552 acres in 2006. That expansion keeps this stretch of the great river looking the way the cart drivers saw it. Few places let you meet the Mississippi this personally. These riverbank miles go quickly, and the two rivers trade places in your view as you close the loop toward the confluence overlook. The Crow Wing arrives wide and calm from the west, folds into the Mississippi, and loses its name. It is the kind of simple geographic moment that rewards just standing still for a while. Water built everything here: the trade, the town, the crossing. It is still doing the only thing it ever did, moving through. The park's wildlife has reclaimed the townsite along with the trees. White-tailed deer browse the old clearings at dusk, and the river corridor draws bald eagles, ospreys, herons, and waves of migrating waterfowl. Beaver and otter work the banks where the fur trade once priced their ancestors by the pelt, which is its own quiet piece of justice. Songbirds fill the pines in summer. The most crowded Main Street in this park now belongs entirely to them. The return leg rolls easily through the pines in the late afternoon light, and the whole walk comes in at a little over 2 miles. It is a short hike that carries an enormous amount of story per step. Boomtown, cart highway, crossing, collapse, forest. Few trails anywhere let you walk through an entire town's life and afterlife in under an hour. This one does it without a single ruin, just ground and grass and trees that remember. Minnesota made this ground a state park in 1959, and the historic townsite was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 1970. Today, Crow Wing State Park offers about 14 miles of hiking trails, a campground with more than 60 sites, canoe camping along the river, and a link to the paved Paul Bunyan State Trail. The restored Beaulieu House anchors the interpretive walk through the old town. It is an easy day trip from Brainerd, and it pairs a genuinely good river hike with one of the best history walks in the state. Bring the kids and bring a little imagination. Every place we walk is a layer cake of the lives that came before, but few places show their layers as gently as Crow Wing. A wing-shaped island, a battle, a fur post, a screeching cart highway, a boomtown, a railroad snub, and a forest that took it all back. The lesson of this trail is that even the busiest crossroads can go quiet in a single generation. And that quiet, given time, can become something worth protecting. That feels like a fair trade. Crow Wing State Park is proof that the best stories are not always in the guidebook chapters with the famous names. Sometimes they are under the grass of a quiet riverbank, 10 miles from the town that stole the railroad. If you find yourself in the Brainerd Lakes country, give this place an afternoon, walk the old Main Street, and stand where the carts cross the river. History does not need buildings to be loud. Thank you for watching. Follow for more of the trails of the world.